Hello everyone and welcome back. It's pretty scary to be alone in the middle of nowhere, isn't it? Your mind starts to do crazy things. You're hearing and seeing things that don't exist, or maybe they do. In that case, grab your flashlight and run. Number 1. Where do I start? So I was just about 24 years old when my cousin Charlie had gotten throat cancer. He wasn't really my cousin. He was my dad's cousin. But for whatever reason, I always called him Cousin Charlie. Anyways, he and his wife lived up around San Luis Obispo. And when he was finally recovering from cancer, he went to stay in his estate in mainland Hawaii. At one point, he needed someone to babysit his house in San Luis, and I volunteered. Fast forward, I'm staying at his place by myself. We're talking satellite internet and television slower than a snail. I had found myself enthralled in a Lord of Rings marathon and proceeded to stay up till around 2:30 a.m. The marathon ends, and I proceed to make some green tea. That's when I hear it. A distant scream calls across the valley below. I knew it was a human scream, but for some reason I just refused to believe it. The thing about houses inland from San Luis is that you have a lot of room between your neighbors. We're talking about 2 miles apart from each other. If someone played music on the other side of the hill, you had no problem hearing it. I thought maybe they screamed because they were watching a scary film, or perhaps they were playing a board game. I really don't know. I just did my best to imagine it was me over-exaggerating. About 2 minutes had gone by, and I passed it off at this time, getting lost in infomercials. That's when I heard something familiar to a firecracker, but then I heard it multiple times. Something didn't seem right. So I grabbed the nearest blunt object and headed upstairs. My cousin Charlie has a 360-degree second deck, which I proceeded to go and take watch on with a fire poker. Like that would do me any good. I listened, but I could only hear the wind. I would later end falling asleep in one of the rocking chairs, and then waking up about 40 minutes later. What I later found out from my cousin Charlie is that a man had got into a big argument with his wife and shot her as she ran from the house. I also later found out that because I was the only one who had left the outside lights on, that she had run towards me, but died from her wounds about 60% of the way here. This still gives me chills. Number 2.
This happened to myself and a close friend, both 23-year-old males, just last month. We decided to go on a 2-night backpacking camping trip in the Adirondack Mountains in New York. We're both very comfortable with nature and spend a lot of time camping, hunting, fishing, etc. We hiked about 5 miles into a small lake and set up camp on a small beach. This was not a heavily trafficked area, and we did not expect to run into anyone. Our first night there, as we were sitting around the fire, we saw a flashlight moving on the other side of the lake around 10:30. This was fairly unusual. However, we did not think too much of it. But as time went on, this flashlight kept moving around the lake, getting closer to our campsite. We kept discussing who could possibly be wandering around the woods in the middle of the night, and we did not particularly want an unwelcomed guest. Once it was clear that the person or people were heading for our campsite, we moved off into the woods nearby to see who wandered up. I took a small axe with me, and he had a .22 rifle. Now, we weren't expecting trouble, and we certainly didn't want to make any, but we figured we might as well cover our bases. Now, the moment of truth, the flashlight comes near the light of our fire, and it's one man. He has a beard and is probably in his mid-40s. The scary part was he was carrying what turned out to be a pump-action shotgun. He walked around the campsite a few times and then proceeded to enter our tent. After rummaging around for a minute or so, he came out and started yelling, "I know you're out there, why don't you come and say hello?" My friend and I remained motionless under a hemlock tree, about 50 yards away. That's when the man proceeded to fire his shotgun into the woods, not too far from where we were. He also swung his flashlight around several times. After what felt like hours, he grabbed my friend's backpack and a few articles of clothing we had drying off near the fire and threw them in to burn. My friend, who had trained the .22 at the man, asked me if he should shoot. I told him absolutely not, unless he spots us and starts to point the gun in our direction. Thankfully, the man moved off from where he had come after a little while. We waited until his flashlight was on the other side of the lake, ran out, grabbed everything we could fit in my pack and took off. It was now around 2 or 3 a.m. We ran out the trail with flashlights and made it back to my car as the sun was coming up. We immediately went to the police department and reported it, where we also spoke with some forest rangers. That was it. I haven't heard anything back from the police. It wasn't mysterious, however, it creeped the hell out of both of us.
Number 3. Some friends and I would take my truck up in the mountains during the winter time and tow someone in a tube across the snow. We'd drop the tailgate in my old long bed Ford, and a few guys would sit in the back with one of those bazillion candlelight spotlights. When I was driving, it'd be fun to make really wide turns in the dark so the person on the tube didn't have the luxury of headlights or taillights to somewhat illuminate their trail. The person in the bed of the truck with the spotlight would be funny and shine the light clear off to the side so it was pitch black if you were on the tube. One particular winter night, a snowstorm was rolling, and so we headed up to the usual spot, and it was dark that night. A friend was on the tube. I was driving, watching my mirrors as I'd swing him wide enough he had little light to see anything. The guy with the spotlight shined the light clear to the side of the truck, and as I checked my mirror and I made eye contact with a guy dressed in jeans, a red plaid shirt, and a blaze orange ball cap. As we made eye contact, I lost all control of my body for probably only 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I stopped the truck and turned it around and asked the guys if they saw him. They all said no. So I flipped the truck around and turned on the light beams, and they shined the spotlight all over. I got out and looked for footprints in the fresh snow, and saw nothing. That night, we went back home and I told my dad about the weird experience, and he didn't think anything of it. A week later, on the news, the police reported finding a body in the area close to where we were and asked for any tips. My old man convinced me to call the police and tell them we were up in the area and saw that guy. I called and the police said they'd sent an investigator over. He came over to the house. I recalled the same experience, saying it happened 7 days earlier. As soon as I said that, the investigator asked me, "You're sure on the date?" Which I was positive. And he showed me a picture of the body they found wearing the same red plaid shirt and blaze orange ball cap. He informed me the body had been on the mountain for at least a month, so I must have just seen something. Turns out it was a man who suffered from some mental handicaps and committed suicide on the mountain a month prior to when I saw him. Number 4.
I was camping in upstate New York a week after 2 prisoners escaped. This was a high notoriety escape and was national news. My girlfriend and I had hiked and camped for 2 days before this. We were very comfortable, had met a lot of awesome people, but everyone was on alert of the escapees. We had settled in a remote area upstate New York with no one around that night. I was sound asleep that night. At 5:30 a.m. I started to wake up, but stayed in my tent. Not trying to awake, but maybe go back to sleep for an hour or two. Not long after I woke up did I hear rustling in the woods around our campsite. At first, it was a few rustles which caught my attention, but not enough to be alarmed. Suddenly, the rustling is right outside our tent, and I'm on edge. Before I could even tap my girlfriend, all hell breaks loose. My tent is slashed open with a knife while I'm watching. My heart almost went through my throat. Before I knew it was happening, I was being pile-driven into the ground by men with guns. Thankfully, I had noticed in those seconds that the men had police armor on. I started screaming out my name, my address, my social security number, everything. My girlfriend was even jumped on and forcefully subdued while she was sleeping. Once everyone's adrenaline calmed down, we showed our IDs and proved we were just camping. It was one of the scariest moments of my life, and also for the police officers that subdued us. Turns out we were not far from where they were just spotted, and the police hadn't come across anyone in days. They had thought for sure that they had come upon the escapees' camp.
Hello there. Thank you so much for listening. This video is a collaboration with a very talented narrator beside the dying fire. He is so kind and he helped me by narrating 2 of the stories in this video. It would mean the world to me if you head over to his channel and subscribe, because he has amazing stories for you to hear. You can find the link to his channel in the description or on the end screen, and I will see you all in my next video.